My mama used to say, God sends you exactly who you're meant to save. She never warned me that the person you save sometimes tries to own you afterward. She never told me that mercy could turn into a mirror and that a man who sees himself for the first time in a black woman's eyes will spend the rest of his life trying to keep that mirror close. My name is Amara Bennett. I'm 34 years old. I work the night shift in an emergency room on the south side of Chicago. And on the night this story begins, I was so tired I could feel my own heartbeat in my teeth. I just finished a 16-hour shift. We'd lost a 16-year-old boy to a stray bullet, and his mama had screamed in a way that doesn't leave a person's ears, not ever. I'd given my last $20 to his little sister so she could take a cab home because nobody had come for her. So I was walking, in the rain, in November, through a part of the city where women like me are supposed to keep our heads down and our keys between our fingers. I wasn't praying out loud, but my body was. Every step was a prayer. Lord, get me home. Lord, let my grandmother still be breathing when I get there. Lord, remind me why I keep doing this work for a paycheck that barely covers the rent. And then I saw the car. A black town car, the kind that doesn't belong on 63rd Street at 2 in the morning, wrapped around a streetlight like it had been thrown there, steam rising off the hood, glass on the wet asphalt catching the orange light, and nobody at all stopping. I want you to understand something. 3 people walked past that car before I got to it. 3. A woman with a grocery bag, a man on a bicycle, another man on his phone. They all looked and they all kept moving because in our part of the world, you learn early that getting involved in somebody else's emergency can cost you everything. But I'm a nurse, and my grandmother raised me on one verse and one verse only. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. I didn't have time to check if the man slumped against that steering wheel was the least of anybody. I just moved. He was unconscious, white man, maybe mid-40s, blood running from his temple into the collar of a suit that probably cost more than my car. The airbag had deployed and deflated. I could smell whiskey. I could also smell something else, something I've learned to recognize in 15 years of emergency medicine. I could smell a man who had been driving towards something on purpose. I called 911. I kept his airway open. I talked to him the whole time, even though he couldn't hear me, because that's what you do. You don't let a soul leave a body in silence if you can help it. I told him my name. I told him about my grandmother. I told him the rain was going to stop soon, even though I had no idea if that was true. The paramedics came. They thanked me. They asked for my name for the report, and I gave it because I had nothing to hide. And then I walked the rest of the way home in shoes that squelched with every step. I climbed 3 flights of stairs. I checked on my grandmother, who was sleeping. I sat on the edge of my bathtub, still in my scrubs, and I cried for 10 minutes, not for him, for the boy we'd lost earlier that night. Then I went to bed.
I didn't know I had just saved Julian Hartwell. I didn't know who Julian Hartwell was. And honestly, if I had known, I might have walked on. 3 weeks passed. I forgot about him the way you forget about everyone you patch up and never see again. That's a survival skill in my line of work. You cannot carry every face home with you, or your house gets too crowded for the living. And then one Tuesday evening, while I was eating cold jollof rice straight out of the pot because I was too tired to plate it, somebody knocked on my apartment door. It was a man in a charcoal coat that looked like it had never been rained on in its life. He was polite. He took off his hat. He asked if I was Amara Bennett. He handed me a cream-colored envelope, the kind of paper that feels like cloth, and he said, "Mr. Hartwell would like to thank you in person, ma'am. A car is downstairs whenever you're ready. There's no obligation." Then he turned around and left. I stood in my doorway in my house clothes holding that envelope, and I almost threw it in the trash. I'm going to be honest with you. I almost did. Because in my experience, when a strange man with money comes looking for a black woman, he is not coming to thank her. He is coming to figure out what she wants so he can give her the smallest possible version of it and never see her again. But my grandmother was awake by then, sitting in her chair by the window with her Bible open, and she said without even looking up, "Baby, sometimes God moves through the strangest doors. Don't slam them all." So the next morning, I put on my best dress, the navy one I saved for funerals and job interviews, and I got in the car. The penthouse was on the 78th floor of a building downtown that I had walked past 1,000 times without ever once imagining the inside of. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows, a grand piano nobody played, a view of Lake Michigan that made me forget, just for a second, how angry I was. He was waiting for me by the window, leaning on a cane. Julian Hartwell, 6 feet tall, salt and pepper hair, a small white scar at his temple where I had pressed my hand 3 weeks earlier. He turned around, and the look on his face was not the look of a billionaire greeting a guest. It was the look of a man meeting the person who had pulled him out of the river he had jumped into. "Miss Bennett," he said, "thank you for coming." I didn't sit down. I said, "You're welcome. Is that all?" He almost smiled. "No, that's not all." He told me everything. He told me he had been drinking that night. He told me he had been driving away from a meeting where his board had asked him to step down. He told me his wife had died of cancer 4 years before, and his daughter hadn't spoken to him in 2. He told me that when he got behind that wheel of that car, he had not been planning to come home. And then he said, "You interrupted something, Miss Bennett. I don't know what to call it, but I know I owe you my life." I looked at this man, this stranger with more money than my entire neighborhood would see in 10 lifetimes, and I felt something I didn't expect. I felt sorry for him. Not pity, sorrow, the kind you feel for somebody who has built a tall, beautiful house and forgotten to put any windows in it. I said, "Then God put me there, not me. Don't thank me, thank him." He blinked. He opened his mouth twice before any sound came out, and finally he said, very quietly, "I haven't thanked God for anything in a long time." "Well," I said, "you got time to start." Then he offered me money. He offered me a number that made my mouth go dry. He offered to pay off my grandmother's medical bills. He offered to put my baby brother through any college he wanted. He offered me a house, a car, a foundation in my name if I wanted one. And I want you to hear me when I tell you this, sister. Every cell in my exhausted, broke, double-shift body wanted to say yes. Every cell. Because I had been carrying so much for so long, and here was a man telling me I could put it down. But I didn't say yes. I said, "Mr. Hartwell, I didn't pull you out of that car to be paid. I pulled you out because somebody needed pulling. That's all. If I take your money, then what I did stops being mercy and starts being a transaction, and I won't let you turn the best thing I did this year into a receipt." He stared at me like I had spoken a language he had never heard before, and maybe I had. I left. I rode the elevator down 78 floors, I took the bus home, and I did not look back. I thought that was the end. It was not the end. About a month later, the hospital where I worked received a donation, a brand new MRI machine, top of the line, the kind we'd been begging the city for. No name on the plaque, just the word anonymous. A week after that, my baby brother called me from school crying because a scholarship had appeared in our late mother's name. Full ride, books included, no application required. I knew. Of course I knew. I marched into that building downtown in my scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic, and I told the security guard I was there to see Mr. Hartwell, and I was not leaving until I did. He came down to the lobby himself, cane in hand, calm as a Sunday. I said, "You think you can buy your way into being a good man?
Goodness isn't a transaction, Julian. It's a habit, and you don't have it yet. He looked at me for a long moment, and he said, soft and broken in a way no rich man should ever sound, "Then teach me, because I don't know any other language." That was the sentence that undid me. Not the money, not the penthouse, that sentence. Because I have known a lot of men in my life who needed to be loved, and almost none of them have ever known how to ask.
I told him about my mother, who died of an aneurysm when I was 9, in the middle of folding laundry. No warning, no goodbye. I told him about my grandmother, who raised me on faith and hot water cornbread. I told him about being the only black girl in nursing school, and the way certain professors looked at me like I was a clerical error. I told him about feeling invisible to the world I keep alive. And somewhere around hour 4, I realized something. I wasn't sitting across from a billionaire. I was sitting across from a man, a scared, lonely, tired man who had been pretending to be a statue for so long he had almost forgotten he could move. When he walked me to the elevator that night, he didn't try to touch me. He didn't try to kiss me. He said, "Amara, can I see you again?" And I said yes. "Lord, forgive me." I said yes. His world did not say yes back. The first photograph leaked within a week, a grainy shot of us walking out of a small restaurant in Hyde Park. The headline read, "Hartwell's Mystery Companion." By the next morning, somebody had figured out my name, my job, my address, and my mother's maiden name. A society columnist wrote a piece that referred to me as the help with ambitions. Somebody else wrote a piece speculating about how much I was being paid. His board called an emergency meeting. His sister flew in from Connecticut to stage what she called an intervention. His dead wife's mother left him a voicemail that I accidentally overheard, in which she called me a word I will not repeat on this channel, a word my grandmother fought a whole movement so I wouldn't have to hear. And it wasn't just his side. My own people had questions too. My cousins wanted to know what a man like that really wanted from a woman like me. My pastor pulled me aside after service and asked, gentle but pointed, if I had prayed on this. A woman at work who I thought was my friend said loud enough for me to hear, "She thinks she's about to be a Disney princess." I had spent my whole life being told I wasn't enough. Now I was being told I was too much. Too black for his world, too poor, too proud, too churchy, too country. And I started to wonder if love could even survive an air this thin. I almost walked away. Twice I packed an overnight bag and put it by the door. Twice my grandmother looked up from her chair and said nothing, because she knew I needed to choose for myself. What kept me there was his daughter. Eliza Hartwell showed up at my apartment door at 3 o'clock in the morning, drunk, mascara halfway down her face, 19 years old and shaking. She had taken a rideshare from a club downtown all the way to the south side, in heels, alone, just to scream at me. She stood in my doorway and she said, "You are not my mother. You will never be my mother. Do you understand me?" I looked at this child, because that's what she was, a child. A grieving, drunk, terrified child who had lost her mama and then lost her daddy to his own grief, and now thought she was about to lose what was left of him to a stranger. I didn't argue with her. I didn't defend myself. I stepped aside and I said, "Come in, baby. It's cold."
I made her tea, the cheap kind, in a chipped mug. I gave her one of my grandmother's blankets. I sat on the floor next to the couch while she cried, and I didn't say a word for almost an hour. And then, when she was empty, I said, "I'm not trying to be your mama. I couldn't be if I tried. But I'd like to be somebody you can call at 3 in the morning. That's all I'm asking for. Nothing more." She fell asleep on my couch. In the morning, she ate grits and eggs, and she didn't look at me. But before she left, she hugged me. Quick, awkward, like she didn't know how. And she whispered, "Don't tell him I came." I didn't. Not for a long time. 2 months later, Julian did what billionaires do when they're scared. He went too big. He flew me to Paris on a private jet. He took me to a restaurant on the Seine where they closed the entire dining room just for us. He gave a speech I think he had been practicing for weeks, about giving me the world, about every door being open to me,
about the kind of life he could build for me if I would just let him. And then he opened a velvet box, and inside that box was a diamond the size of my thumbnail. I closed the box. Gently, I slid it back across the table. I said, "Julian, I don't want the world. I want a man. I want to know if you can love me on a Tuesday, in sweatpants, when I'm tired and my breath is bad and my faith is louder than your money. I want to know if you can sit next to me in my grandmother's church and clap on the wrong beat and not be embarrassed. I want to know if you can be small with me, because that's all real love is, Julian. Two people agreeing to be small together. Can you do that?" He didn't answer me. He couldn't. I got on a commercial flight back to Chicago the next morning. Window seat, middle of the plane. I cried quietly the whole way home, behind sunglasses, the way grown black women cry when we don't want to make anybody else uncomfortable. Then came 3 weeks of silence. I went back to my shifts. I told myself it was over. I told myself I had known better. I told myself a billionaire and a night shift nurse was never a real love story. It was just a chapter in a memoir I'd never write. But in the middle of those 3 weeks, my grandmother slipped. A small stroke, then a bigger one. Hospice came into the house. I sat by her bed and I held her hand and I tried not to count her breaths. One afternoon, she opened her eyes and she looked at me with that clear, last-mile clarity old women get when they're close to the door, and she said, "Baby, a man who has never been told no doesn't know who he is yet. Give him time to find out." I said, "Grandma, he's not coming back." She squeezed my hand. She smiled. She said, "He already is." She passed 3 days later, on a Sunday morning, just as the church bell started ringing somewhere down the block. The funeral was small. A storefront church on 71st Street. Folding chairs. Paper fans with the funeral home's name printed on the back. The choir was 4 old women and a man on an electric keyboard. Exactly the way she would have wanted it. I was sitting in the front row, holding my brother's hand, trying to remember how to breathe, when I felt the whole room shift. You know that feeling? When somebody walks into a space and the air rearranges itself around them? I turned around. Julian Hartwell was sitting in the back row. Plain dark suit, no security, no phone, no press, hair wet from the rain outside. He was holding a single white flower in his hands like he didn't quite know what to do with it. He didn't come up to me. He didn't make it about himself. He sat through the whole 2-hour service. He stood when we stood. He bowed his head when we prayed. When the choir asked the room to sing, he opened his mouth and tried, even though he didn't know a single word of soon and very soon. And after the burial, when the women of the church laid out the repast in the basement, he took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and washed dishes, next to the deacons, for 2 hours. He didn't talk to me. He didn't try. He just washed dish after dish after dish, while the aunties whispered behind their hands and tried to figure out who he was. When the last plate was dry, he came up to me. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just said, "Your grandmother, what was her name?" I said, "Ruth. Her name was Ruth." He nodded. He said, "I would have liked to have met her." And then he left. That was the day I knew. Not because he was perfect. Not because he had finally said the right thing, but because he had finally learned how to show up small. 6 months later, on the porch of my grandmother's house, the house I had inherited, the house I had spent my weekends painting back to life 1 room at a time, Julian Hartwell got down on one knee. There was no jet. There was no rooftop. There was a glass of sweet tea sweating on the railing, and a neighbor's dog barking 2 yards over, and the smell of somebody's barbecue drifting through the screen door. He didn't open a velvet box from a vault. He opened a small, scratched-up silver ring box that had clearly been in somebody's drawer for 50 years. Inside was a thin gold band with 1 small, slightly crooked diamond. He said, "This belonged to my grandmother. Her name was Mary. She raised 6 children in a 2-room house in Pennsylvania on a steelworker's pension, and she's the only person in my whole bloodline who ever told me I had a soft heart and meant it as a compliment. He swallowed. His hands were shaking. He said, "Amara, I don't have a soul to offer you. You already saved it. All I have left to give you is the rest of my life. It's not as much as you deserve, but if you'll have it, every Tuesday in sweatpants, every Sunday in church, every funeral and every grocery run and every ordinary morning, it's yours." I said yes. Quiet, like a prayer, the way my grandmother used to say amen. We got married a year later in the same storefront church where I had buried my grandmother. My baby brother walked me down the aisle. Eliza, Julian's daughter, stood up there with me as a bridesmaid in a sage green dress, and when she handed me my bouquet, she whispered, "Thank you for not leaving him. Thank you for not leaving me." There was a photograph of my grandmother Ruth on a chair in the front row, where she would have been sitting. There was a photograph of his wife Eleanor on a chair beside her, because I had insisted, because that woman had raised the daughter who had raised the man, and her chair belonged in that room too. I did not marry a billionaire that day. I want you to hear me. I married a man who had learned how to kneel. There is a difference. The world will try to confuse the two, but you must never let it. So that's my story, sister. That's how a night shift nurse from the South Side ended up with a husband whose name used to scroll across the bottom of CNBC. But I need you to understand something before you click off this video. The miracle of my life is not the penthouse. It is not the diamond. It is not the wedding. The miracle is that I never once, not for a single second, made myself smaller to be loved. I never apologized for my faith. I never apologized for my people. I never apologized for the way I cried at that boy's mama in the emergency room, or the way I gave my last $20 to his sister. I brought every single piece of myself to that man's table, and the table got bigger to make room. They will tell you a story like mine is a fairy tale. It isn't. A fairy tale is when a man rescues a woman. My story is the other kind, the harder kind. The kind where a woman shows a man that being rescued is allowed. The kind where mercy is the dowry. The kind where God writes the love letter and uses a black woman's hands to deliver it. And to every black woman watching this tonight, the one on her 10th hour of a 12-hour shift, the one eating cold rice over the kitchen sink, the one sending money she doesn't have to people who never say thank you, the one who feels invisible while she keeps the world alive, I need you to hear me. You are not background. You are not the help. You are not too much, and you are never, ever too late. You are the answered prayer that somebody out there has not yet learned to recognize. And when he does, don't let him buy you. Let him learn you. My mama was right. God does send you exactly who you are meant to save. She just forgot to mention that sometimes, if you stay still long enough, and if you keep your hands open instead of closed, he sends them back to save you too. If this story moved something in you tonight, do me a favor. Subscribe to Most Feared Revolt and stay close, because we tell stories where our women are seen, our love is honored, and our faith always, always wins. Tap that like button so the algorithm knows to send this to the next sister who needs to hear it tonight. Share it with somebody who's tired. And tell me down in the comments, would you have closed the velvet box too? I'll be reading every single one. Until next time, beloved, walk in the rain when you have to. You never know whose life you're about to save. You never know whose life is about to save you back.